AP2 students. Today we're doing lab number 2 and we are talking about blood. So today is all about blood. And when we're thinking about blood, it's actually divided up into two separate parts. There's the liquid part, which is called plasma, and then there is the cellular part, which is the formed elements. So formed elements are the cells, and then the plasma is the liquid. So microscopically speaking, of course, we're going to be looking more at the cells, the formed elements. And really we need to put some quotes on this word cells, because as we're going to see, formed elements don't always live up to that word cells. All right, let's dive in and realize there are 3 classes of formed elements. There are your red blood cells, platelets, and white blood cells. And this is actually in order of abundance in your blood. So in your blood, you've got mostly red blood cells, followed by platelets, followed by white blood cells. So let us start by talking a bit and then looking at red blood cells. So red blood cells, and you can just see how numerous they are in this blood smear slide here. Red blood cells are also called erythrocytes. The erythro part means red, cyte of course means cells. Now, when I look at these guys, so this is a red blood cell right here, this is a red blood cell right here, and of course there are lots of them. One of the things I'm going to notice is that these guys are anucleate. So what does that mean? That means they lack a nucleus. And there's pros and cons for this. The lack of a nucleus is going to free up space, and that space means we can store more of this protein called hemoglobin. And hemoglobin is the protein that can bind and hold on to oxygen. And in fact, the major job of red blood cells, of course, is to carry oxygen. So by being anucleate, we can have more hemoglobin. More hemoglobin means we can be better at carrying oxygen to our tissues that, of course, desperately need it. Now, by the way, we mentioned these are the most abundant of our blood cells, these red blood cells, and numerically, we're looking at about 5 million in a microliter of blood. So you have a lot of red blood cells, a whole lot. Now, by the way, the downside of being anucleate is red blood cells cannot repair themselves. They cannot reproduce themselves. They live for about, 4 months or so, and then they die. Okay. So, more red blood cells here, just so many red blood cells. They have what is called a biconcave shape. So if I were to look at a red blood cell like laterally, it would look kind of like a dumbbell shaped or like a dog bone shape, where it's expanded on the 2 ends and very narrow in the middle. And so what's going on here is it is punched in twice. That's what biconcave means, punched in twice. And this actually makes red blood cells rather flexible and rather stackable, which is good for getting through narrow blood vessels. Now, one consequence of the biconcavity is they're so thin in the middle. And then if you look at this guy right here, it looks like he's empty in the middle. He's not actually empty in the middle. He's just really skinny in that middle because of that biconcave shape. All right. What do we got here? Obviously, we've got red blood cells. You can see their biconcavity as evidenced by their, donut shape here. Anucleate for more hemoglobin, for more oxygen. And we got some more red blood cells here. A couple red blood cells, more than a couple of red blood cells in this pic have lost the proper shape. So like, well, this guy is a classic example right there. That guy right there, another one right here. These guys have become sickle-shaped. If you're sickle-shaped, if you're not biconcave, then you're not going to be able to go through blood vessels as well, and you're not going to be able to do your job of transporting oxygen. Okay, cool stuff. Some more red blood cells. We're also starting to see some platelets here. Platelets are tiny. They're smaller than red blood cells. Here is a lovely platelet. Platelets are merely cell fragments, so they don't live up to the word cell. By the way, red blood cells, they don't live up to the word cell either because they have no nucleus. Okay. So speaking of platelets, platelets are sometimes referred to as thrombocytes. Thrombo means clot, so clot cells literally. But they're not cells, they're just little fragments. Platelets are involved in a big process called hemostasis. Hemostasis is what you do when a blood vessel breaks. One of the aspects of hemostasis is clotting. So clotting is not the only thing, but it is one of the main parts. Now, platelets are our second most abundant formed element. You have about 300,000 or so platelets in a microliter of blood. All right. So platelets are actually little fragments, as we said. There's this big cell in the red bone marrow. Little bits of him are always going to break off. We see it over here. Big cell, sticks out some arms. Arms have arms. And those little arms in the arms break off and they turn into little platelets. Okay. So that brings us to our final formed element of the three, and that's white blood cells. Now, with white blood cells, we actually break them down into two big classes. There are the granulocytes, so cells with little grains, with granules, and the agranulocytes, so cells without little granules. So those are my two big classes of white blood cells. And what we're going to do is further break down these classes. For my granulocytes, my cells with granules, there are three varieties. There are neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils. The phil refers, means loving. I think about the word hydrophilic, for example. Phil means loving, and the first part of these words refer to the dyes that we use to stain these blood cells in order to be able to see them under the microscope. So these are my three classes of granulocytes. This is a neutrophil right here. 60% of your circulating white blood cells, so the white blood cells in the blood, 60% of them, roughly speaking, are neutrophils. Neutrophils have very pale granules. It's hard to even see the granules. But they do have a very characteristic nucleus. So there's the nucleus. And what we can tell about this nucleus, in this case, it is four-lobed. So this is a multi-lobe nucleus. Because of this nuclear shape, neutrophils are sometimes called polymorphonuclear leukocytes. By the way, leukocyte is simply white blood cell. Leuko means white. And so a polymorphonuclear leukocyte, is a white blood cell with many shaped nuclei. So the nuclei might have 4 lobes. They can be a variety of shapes. They might have 3 lobes. They might have 5 lobes. Now, the big job of neutrophils is they are going to kill bacteria. So if you get a bacterial infection, neutrophils, their job is to kill and destroy those bacteria. All right. The next class of granulocyte we have are the eosinophils. And the eos in this literally refers to a time of day. It refers to dawn. So there also often be an orangish coloration to the granules. Orangish, reddish, somewhere, in that region. Think about a sunrise. Sun can take on, kind of like a whole various shades of orange and red. So orangish, reddish granules, a bilobed nucleus. So as opposed to the multilobed like a neutrophil, an eosinophil has a bilobed nucleus. By the way, these guys are about 3% of your circulating white blood cells, and their major job is to kill parasitic worms, like these two guys right here, embedded in the wall of the small intestine. Eosinophils are also involved in reducing allergic responses. So those are my eosinophils. We got one right here. And by the way, as always, note the red blood cells, and we have some platelets as well. Okay, good stuff. Basophils, my final granulocyte. Now, basophils make up 1% or less of your circulating white blood cells. Their diagnostic feature are these purple granules. They have these very dark purple granules that we can see in here. And these dark purple granules often obscure the nucleus. Like, it's hard to even see that nucleus in there, but the nuclei tend to be bilobed. The granules actually contain a pair of inflammatory chemicals called histamine and heparin, and basophils are very much involved in the inflammatory process, which, contrary to popular imagination, inflammation is almost always a good thing. It is your first step in the healing process. All right, fantastic. Hopefully you guys are following along with me. I've got a bunch of red blood cells here, and I have one variety of white blood cell. Can you figure out what I got? This dude, this guy, all the same thing. Give you a second, and it is a neutrophil. These guys are neutrophils. Did you get that right? I hope so. All right, I've got two different varieties of white blood cells, plus I got a platelet, and lots of reds. So first of all, who is this guy and this guy? They are the same thing. What are they? They are neutrophils. And then what about this dude and this fella? I like this one. This one's probably my favorite just because of the coloration here. These guys are both eosinophils. All right, hopefully you passed that little test right there. I got even more white blood cells. Who are these two guys right here? Again, I'll give you a second. Get your idea. This and this, they are both eosinophils. Fantastic. I got two here, this guy and this guy. Easy, look at that color. This is another what? This is another eosinophil. And this guy, I can see the nucleus, but I see these really dark purple granules. That guy must be a basophil. All right, good work. Even more. Basophil on the left, eosinophil on the right. Man, I got carried away with so many here. What are these guys? These three, all three are basophils. If you said basophils, you were correct. And now we're done the granulocytes. Let's do the agranulocytes. Two varieties, lymphocytes and monocytes. Lympho and monocytes. Two of my favorite white blood cells. I got 5 favorite white blood cells, in fact. I like lymphocytes quite a bit. They're agranulocytes. They have no granules. They do have a nice, often very circular, very round purple nucleus. And they typically are around 30% of your circulating white blood cells. you actually have two varieties of lymphocytes, two main varieties. They're the B lymphocytes, which are going to make antibodies, which are immune proteins. And then there are the T lymphocytes, which are going to control your immune system and kill infected cells. Fantastic. Monocytes. So monocytes make up about 6%. They usually have an indented, like a C-shaped or kidney-shaped nucleus. No granules, but they are big cells. And monocytes are called monocytes when they're in the blood, but when they go into the tissue spaces, they turn into cells called macrophages. Macro meaning big, phage meaning eater. So macrophages will engulf foreign cells, pathogens, broken, damaged, and dead cells. All right. What do we got here? These are two lymphocytes. Not perfect circles, but fairly circular nuclei there. And this guy right here is a what? Dented nucleus. Same thing here, C-shaped nucleus. These are two monocytes. This right here is a what? It is a neutrophil. All right, one final thing to talk about. This is our last topic in this video. Get this done in about, 20 minutes or so. So one of the things that can be done is you can look at a blood sample and you could count the number of different white blood cells that you're seeing. So like, for example, suppose we had a blood sample and we looked at it and we counted 183 neutrophils, 81 lymphocytes, 12 monocytes, 51 eosinophils, and no basophils. So these are some good raw numbers here. Now what I would want to do is convert these numbers into percentages, and then I could compare the percentage that I have in my count versus the normal. So to calculate the percentage, I would take the white blood cell I'm interested in. So like, for example, let's say I was interested in neutrophils. I got 181. So I take 181, and then I would divide that by the sum of all of them. Let's add them all up. That's 183, isn't it? I was kind of mixing those two numbers. Let's get rid of that. So we had 183. Let's add everything up. 183 plus 81 is 264, 276, 327. I think I did my math there right. So I would take the one I'm interested in, which is neutrophils, divide it by the sum, which is 327, and then because we're doing a percent, I would multiply that all by 100. So I would bust out my calculator, and I would end up getting an answer of about 56%. Then I could repeat this process for every other white blood cell. Obviously, basophils, I'm going to end up with 0%. So I had what? I had 56 up here. Let me write it in a new color. 56% for my neutrophils. Then I could do 81 divided by 327. So 81 divided by 327 gives me 25% for my lymphocytes. 12 divided by 327 gives me 3%. 51 divided by 327 gives me about 16%. So these are the percentages that I calculated. And I'm going to compare these to my normals. To remember the normals, I like to remember a phrase: never let monkeys eat bananas. And I know my normal percentages: 60, 3631. So I'm going to look and say, okay, what's like really abnormal here? And what's really abnormal is this eosinophil percentage. So 3% versus 16. 16 is 5 times higher than 3. The number of eosinophils is way up. So something's going on here. Maybe this person has some sort of parasitic worm infection. All right. Guaranteed to have to do one of these percentage problems on your first lab exam. Just FYI. And we are done with lab video number 2. If you made it till the end, fantastic. I love it. I will see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.